A young woman is dead, and authorities say it was at the hands, reportedly, of her boyfriend's dad. Whitney Robeson was seemingly living the dream. She was a recent college graduate, just starting her career, her entire life in front of her. But now the question is, how did she die? Initially, it seemed to be an accident, but now police in Alabama are handing down some major charges against a father whose attorneys claim is innocent and an upstanding man, not a criminal. What seemed to have changed that sent this investigation in a shocking direction. We're on the case presented by Law and Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. For roughly 2 months, the death of a woman named Whitney Robeson appeared to be an accident. She was shot and killed at her boyfriend's house, but police say they continued to investigate. I want to show you pictures here of Whitney. She was just 22 years old. She graduated last year from Auburn University. She was originally from Richmond, Virginia. Whitney landed at Auburn, though, because she knew what she wanted to do with her life. She wanted to work in interior design. And we actually found her interior design Instagram. And you can just see the style that she had, the eye for the career that she dreamed to work in. She was a sister in a sorority at Auburn. She was loved by so many people, and as many do at an SEC school, she learned to love college football, and she was very close with her family. Her obituary reads, quote, "Though we never could have begun to imagine it, the final chapter of Whitney's life took place in Birmingham, Alabama, mere weeks before her tragic and unexpected passing. Whitney was hitting her stride exactly the way we always knew she would, in her new role as a trade consultant at Restoration Hardware. This marvelous, independent woman was on the cusp of her successful career in interior design, the job that she had always wanted since she was a little girl watching HGTV. In the precious little time she had been in that role, Whitney's new colleagues and supervisor were instantly taken by her kindness, talent, attentiveness, and integrity. To have known Whitney, no matter where, how, why, or for how long, is to have been touched and transformed by her radiant soul. Now, the loss of a life is always hard to make sense of, no matter who it is. But in this case, you are left wondering how it could happen. Not just how it could happen to someone who had done so much right in their life and had so much more to give, but how could this happen based on what we know from police so far in this case? Now, before we get into what we are learning about this investigation and why it appears police may have moved forward with charges, I want you to see a picture of this man. His name is Jeffrey Scott Towers. He's 54 years old. He's from Alabama, and he's the person who allegedly pulled the trigger that took Whitney's life. AL.com says that he is the father of her boyfriend. Now, it doesn't appear that Towers has social media, so the only picture at this point that we have of him that is making its way around the internet as this story has picked up so much attention, now on a national level, is his mugshot. And this picture was taken when police decided to move forward with charges in connection to Whitney's death. Now, I reached out to Towers' attorneys to see if they could give us some insight into what happened, and they said that their client has been, quote, a productive and upstanding citizen for his entire life. They also say he has no criminal history. So let's talk a little bit more now about what we know about how Whitney died. So I want to go back to March 7th, when police were called to a home in Trussville, Alabama, which is about like a half hour northeast of Birmingham. It was a Saturday night, and it's around 9:20 when a gunshot was reportedly fired, according to police. Whitney was the person who was shot. She was taken to a Birmingham hospital, and by 11 p.m. that night, she was pronounced dead. Now, the house where the shooting happened appears to be on a cul-de-sac in Trussville, and from what we can see, it is a very nice neighborhood, several big homes in this neighborhood, and we did a background check of Towers, and it shows that he has an address on the street that police responded to. So let's go back to the 7th here. Police referred to the incident at the time as isolated and no threat to the public, according to AL.com. Now, as someone who follows true crime, you have heard those lines before. Police also said at that time that someone had been detained, but the name of that person, the circumstances surrounding what happened, none of that was released. The coroner in Jefferson County, Alabama, ruled that Whitney's death was an accident, but no charges were filed. And this story appeared at that point to be a tragedy and nothing more. It didn't appear to be a criminal case. It was just a case of incredible heartbreak and the loss of life that a family and loved ones could never recover from. But now everything's changed. This is now a criminal case, a very serious criminal case. And police have hit the father of Whitney's boyfriend with serious charges. So it's roughly 2 months after Whitney was shot and killed inside that home in Trussville, Alabama, that the Trussville Police Department said, quote, following an extensive investigation conducted by the department's Criminal Investigations Division, detectives obtained an arrest warrant on May 11th, 2026, through the Jefferson County District Attorney's Office for Jeffrey Scott Towers of Trussville. Police have charged Jeffrey Scott Towers with manslaughter. Police say that Towers was taken into custody on May 11th without incident, and he was able to post a bond, and that bond was set at $30,000. So he is now out as this case is now working its way through the criminal justice system. Now, as I said, I did reach out to the attorneys representing Jeffrey Scott Towers. This is the full statement that they sent us. Quote, what happened to Ms. Robeson was a tragic event. While we understand that the justice system must play out, we know that the facts will show that Mr. Towers has no criminal history, has been a productive and upstanding citizen for his entire life, and is not guilty of these charges, end quote. Now, the big question still to this point is what happened inside the house? We don't know where Whitney was shot. We don't know what led up to that shot being fired. And we also don't know what led police to say that this is not just an accident like it was originally considered, but it's something they believe is much darker, a criminal charge of manslaughter. It's also unclear at this point when Towers will next appear in court or when police will release information about what happened inside that home that led to Whitney's death. But we are working to try and get as many pieces of information as we can to understand what happened inside of that home. Now, before I get to an attorney who's going to join us and we're going to talk a little bit more about exactly what may be going on in this case, I want to talk a little bit more about Whitney. Her friend told the Auburn Plainsman student newspaper, quote, her self-confidence, her drive, I aspire to be like her one day and have goals like hers, to have such a lust for life because she truly lived her life to the fullest in everything that she did, end quote. Join us now to talk more about this, John Phillips, victim rights lawyer. Thank you as always for being with us on Law and Crime. I know you know Alabama well and practice there. What does it tell you? And there's a lot that we don't know in this case, and that's kind of the big question mark everybody's trying to figure out. But what does it tell you that you have a coroner, county coroner, rules this an accidental shooting reportedly back in March, but here we are 2 months later, and Towers, Jeffrey Towers, is now facing a manslaughter charge.
2 months and 4 days, I think.
Yeah.
You know, oftentimes what you see in the homicide report is just, or in the autopsy report, is just the word homicide. I gave it away in the question. You know, the coroners just try to determine whether a man killed a man or woman, and they don't get into the whys or the hows. Now, at points, they're used forensically to look at bullet trajectory, the gunpowder residue, strip plating, all of the things to try to determine, you know, who, what, when, where, and how. But when you're classifying, you know, murder two, manslaughter, self-defense, that gets into a lot of facts that are going to be outside of that body. And so it is unusual for, you know, for a medical examiner, for the autopsy report to say, I think this is manslaughter. It ventures into the subjective.
How often, and I know you work a lot of times on the civil side, but do investigations like this, you know, a manslaughter investigation, take that amount of time to try and piece together exactly what happened?
You know, they often take longer. So while from a manslaughter, you know, concern to the charging document, that's usually a easier decision because you're not going up for murder, right? You don't have to impanel a grand jury. You don't have to wait on toxicology or or blood spatter analysis. So these cases can take a year. That's not outside the norm when the police force, the prosecutors, they're trying to get it right. Here, because it's almost like confirming what we knew, it does seem like it took a little while. The difference here, though, is you're dealing heavily with a manslaughter charge in the subjective. You're dealing with what witnesses are going to say, how they're going to look, how they present, because the argument here, and we don't know exactly what happened, but I don't know if I have a gun prop near me, I'll use the Sharpie. Somebody had a gun out and something happened and it went off and killed this poor girl. And the question is, what level of intent, what level of recklessness? It's one thing if you're pointing, say, I'm going to shoot you, that you manifested an intent. But usually in manslaughter, it's reckless behavior or accidental behavior with a firearm, which to me is always reckless. That puts it in that 2-month investigation, like manslaughter, category. But if I'm the victim's family, and usually that's who my clients are, I don't feel good about this at all. I don't know what happened. My daughter can't tell her story because she's no longer with us.
And we don't know who was, kind of the other like big question is like, who else was at the house that night? What was going on? We know it's 9:20 on a Saturday. It appears that this is Tower's home, really nice home. It appears to be on a cul-de-sac where all this happened. You touched on something that I think is good in laying it out, just as we're all trying to make sense of this story, because, if it was a murder case and this is not that, it was, just generally speaking, individual one killed individual two, and they wanted to kill individual two. What is it a prosecutor has to prove in a manslaughter case for that to be, someone is guilty of manslaughter?
Right. So people think of classic, and I actually went to law school at University of Alabama, so that's I'm probably a good hour where I went to law school is a good hour from where this happened in the Birmingham area. But the law school criminal defense, criminal 101 is people think of murder, right? Where there's premeditation, where you're thinking about killing somebody, you want to kill somebody, even for an instant, right? Even juries have said reaching for the gun in the glove box, opening it up, that could be time to premeditate. People normally think about this big plan, like I hate this person, I got to figure out how to poison them, I'm researching on Google. Okay, that's not what this is. The next one down from that is like the heat of passion, right? Where you're angry, but it all escalates, or you're in a road rage fight, and all of a sudden you're in a shootout, right? That's not what this is. So by elimination, what's left is there's a gun, it comes out, and there's accidental or reckless use of that firearm to make it go off and hurt or kill somebody. So you've got this accident meets recklessness, and if it gets too reckless, you can fall back into a murder category. And usually you charge after some time. You want the right charge. You're not going to try to charge up. So I'd imagine this is the best they have. They're not committed to it. There's still a statute of limitations that they could up the charge. But usually in that 2 months, they've met with the family. They've met with all the people at the house, assuming there was more than two. I think we're not naming him, but I think there's a fair assumption that the other young man that she was involved with, that was like her boyfriend or something, was probably there. But we've seen these cases where a gun is just laying around and a minor gets it and the parent's charged with something. It's often manslaughter. And it's just this period where people have unsecured guns, or guns that they're mixing with booze or mixing with games, and never ever do that.
Right. No, and that's the thing. And like Alabama, even as a state, is a state where I think the reputation is that gun laws are not as strict, we'll just say, as maybe if you're in a place like Massachusetts or New York. In this situation, and again, we don't know. I'm just kind of throwing that disclaimer. Like we have no idea. We want to know. We're trying to figure out like what happened inside the house. He is held though on a $30,000 bond. And just going by the comment section on the Trussville Police Department's post when they announced this arrest was made, the number one comment that multiple people had made is like, how do you allegedly take a life, even if it's a manslaughter type situation, and yet you're given a bond that you're able to post and then maybe not even spend a night in jail?
Yeah, these things destroy the families, because not only the way I say it when I'm doing presentations to families, I practice in Alabama. Most of my practice is here in Florida now, but it's justice is spelled one way, Justice. It's on my tag of my car. Somehow I got that. But it's defined many different ways by families, and when they're subject to the ultimate wrong, right? When they've lost someone or they're quadriplegic, but mainly in death of a child or parent, you want the criminal case to get it right first, right? Because there is no justice if your killer's walking the streets. Very rare. Then there's like administrative justice. There's the type of justice like Jordan Davis, when he was shot and killed, his mom actually became a congresswoman because she started petitioning Congress, and then Lucy McBath went all the way to being a congresswoman, working on gun laws inside Washington, D.C. There's that movement within you, and the civil case is right there with it, and sometimes facilitates one between the other, and the court of public opinion, where you want your child's story told. And so there's all these things. And when I'm sitting with a victim's family and I'm like, yeah, I guess I'll explain the U.S. Constitution, and let me see if I have my Bill of Rights here, and how bond works. He's got to have a reasonable bond, and he gets the right to meet with attorneys on his own. They don't want to hear it, right? Because their daughter doesn't get bond. Their daughter doesn't get, to be out, to walk around this earth. And it does sting. It does seem low to me. But again, I think that's going to be part and parcel to what the facts are, that this gun was Second Amendment protected, just left or used in a way it shouldn't have been, that's non-malicious.
In some cases, does the bond, is there anything to read into how strong a case prosecutors may have if a judge looked at this case and just said, we're going to go $30,000, as opposed to, if he was held on 100,000 or something more than that. But, if he posts 10%, I mean, that's really, not a lot of money to be able to have to put up to then be able to get out as this case plays forward. Does that say anything when you see a bond that low about how a judge may look at the case and be like, I don't think it's that strong?
It certainly does, because there's also public pressure from the reporting of the bonds that you issue, in cases involving police, battery on a Leo, traditionally all over the country, those get higher bonds. Why? Because those judges have those police officers in their courtroom all the time, right? And they want to protect the police. That same battery to, a homeless person won't have the same bond. Should they? Probably, but it's the nature of the crime. And here, if these were 20-year-old, 19-year-old kids and this happened versus college graduates, I think it matters. If alcohol was involved, I think it matters into what, the probable cause and the likelihood of meeting the burdens of proof go into when a judge is trying to set a fair bond. So yeah, the facts do matter. And we don't know how contested it was by the state, because usually it's them saying, Your Honor, we want no bond or $3 million.
With there being such little information, I might be reading into this a little bit too much. But when I looked at the statement that was released, Johnny Amari, his name, he's a Birmingham criminal defense attorney. the line that he gave about his client was, we know the facts will show that Mr. Towers has no criminal history. He has been a productive and upstanding citizen for his entire life and is not guilty of these charges. And the upstanding citizen part, the productive part, the non-criminal history part, none of that in some cases may factor into what happened that particular night, but it's something you want to put out there for your client, because right now, I don't think he has social media. So the only picture we have of the guy is his mugshot.
Right.
In a manslaughter case, when what happened, and we'll learn the circumstances surrounding it, how important is it, the character part of it, of the person who is accused, when it comes to if and when this would go to trial?
It's huge. And the court of public opinion is the first one that gets their teeth in it. And lawyers are supposed to be responsible regarding with press statements. And I think he did a good job. I don't do criminal defense anymore. I think I've got one case left. Joe Exotic took all of my criminal defense out of me. But there's been times that I've said, all right, you got this mugshot. Give me a good photo that I can substitute, and maybe some will just pick up your good photo. But sometimes you don't want anything out there. And when it comes to, again, subjectivity of manslaughter, I'm not saying it's subjective crime, I'm saying, the circumstantial evidence that goes into it sometimes does depend on criminal history and ethics and morality. And he said, she said, where she can no longer say, you want to build him up right off the bat, your criminal defense client, and said, look, this person should be taken at their word, leave them alone, because the higher the profile case, the more that person's going to get, harassed at the Piggly Wiggly or the Winn-Dixie. This is Alabama, by the way. Had to get a Piggly Wiggly reference.
That's right.
But it's just, it all matters and goes into bond and goes into how quickly it's going to be prosecuted. Usually though, at this point, we have some level of facts. The gun was left on a table, or the gun was, being thrown around the living room, or whatever the scenario is that led to the manslaughter and led to the death. Usually, a little bit more by now. But I keep thinking about this poor young lady's family that probably knows more than we do, but still is mourning and in darkness.
And then just lastly, and I don't know if her family's retained counsel for this. I don't know if there's like some sort of civil action that could come, but how does a manslaughter charge impact any sort of civil action that a family in a situation like theirs might take?
Yeah. So, first of all, there is a wrongful death case to be had here. And there's statutes of limitations depending upon the state of usually 1 to 2 years. I had a family call me a couple of weeks ago in Alabama that wanted to pursue a wrongful death case, and they were told by state agents they still had a case until the conviction happened. And I said, unfortunately, that's not true. It is from the date of loss. It is from the date of the shooting that the civil side needs to take hold. And so they need, once they're, done with mourning, never be done with mourning with lost child, but they need to pursue that and talk to somebody, because there is a wrongful death case. Now, the question is whether it's insured, whether there's assets. That's a whole different analysis. But there's, this meets the criteria of wrongful death, both against the shooter, anybody that, potentially was involved. We've even gone after a gun manufacturer in a case. There's laws that if the gun misfired, that there's lines of immunity, but there's lines of allowance for cases against gun manufacturers, gun sellers, the whole gamut. And you don't know enough at this point. Insurance coverage is written to not allow these cases to go forward or be insured. And then somebody's kind of out on their own paying for a civil attorney on top of paying for a criminal attorney. But, there's a lot of lawyers, myself included, that take these cases. Birmingham has got some of my really good friends that handle these cases.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens next. Obviously, a lot still to learn in this case. Very tragic loss of a young woman who had a lot of life in front of her. We'll see what happens next. John Phillips, victims' rights lawyer. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
Once again, it is unclear when Towers will next face a judge. We're going to continue to follow this story and try and learn more information about what led police to charge him with manslaughter. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and we're also now streaming on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.